Hello and welcome back. In this lecture we will see how we can fetch our user that we just created using its primary key, the item's primary key from our DynamoDB table using our document client or DynamoDB get method. Now to get the user information we will need a new function which will be a new HTTP event mapped to the method get instead of post. So let's create a new function here. I'm going to name it get user, and following the same pattern, just going to copy it, paste it here. Now we're going to use the same user.js file inside the user folder, but we're going to create a new function there. I'm going to call it get user. Let's put get a user info in description. Now this will be an HTTP event like before. I'm going to keep the path same as user, but now I'm going to pass a path parameter which will be our primary key or email by which we want to identify the user and fetch its info, and the method will turn into get. So here instead of passing a post body, we will be passing a path parameter in the URL and get the user's information. Now we need to create the get user method inside our user.js file. Okay. So I'm going to export another method, call it get user. Again it will be a asynchronous method. We will receive the event once again and also the context. We're keeping this parameter context here. We are going to see how we can use context later on in our course, but for now let's just keep it there. Now I'm going to console log the event value here. This will include the HTTP path parameters as well. Now the first thing we will have to capture is the path parameter email that we will send in our HTTP get request. So let's get the email. Now our event will have this value under the attribute called path parameters. Now this will be an object, and inside this object we will get all the path parameters that we will pass. So let's save it here. Now here I need to create a method inside our DynamoDB.js file to fetch the item by its key value. So here I'm just going to write some pseudocode here. We want to get the user info by passing email, which is our primary key. Now let's go to our DynamoDB.js file, and just like we created the create user method, I'm going to create another method called get user. Again it will be asynchronous. Now I will get the email as the first parameter, which is our partition key or primary key, and also the table name. Now again, this time we are going to use DynamoDB.get method, which again takes some parameters. Let's call it params for now, and then promisify it. Right. Now of course we need to set the parameters value here, which will again be the table name, the first parameter, because our client needs to know which table we want to talk to. So this will again be table name. Next thing we need to pass is the key, right? So I'm going to pass the key value. Now this will be an object, and inside it I'm going to pass the email as an attribute and its value. So this is required in case of fetching or getting the values from DynamoDB table. Now a get method also let us choose the columns that we want to, or the fields that we want to fetch. There might be cases when we do not want to fetch all the fields when we are fetching the item. Maybe we just need the last name or the first name. So we can filter those fields by using attribute called projection expression. Now this will be a string with comma separated values of the field we want to fetch. For example, I want email, last name, first name. That's it, right? So when we run the query, the get method will run the query. It will filter out just these fields and send it back to user. Now here, in case we want to know how many RUs are being consumed by DynamoDB to run this query, there can be like thousands, millions of items inside our table, and at some point we will need to monitor the performance, or just would want to know how much of our RUs being spent in running these queries. So you can add another attribute here called return consumed capacity, and set the value as total. And we want to do a consistent read. The other possible values are none or indexes. Now here, if you just want to know how much RUs were consumed by your index and not by index plus your DynamoDB to run the query, you can just pass the value as index here instead of total, and you will receive the RUs consumed by just the index, which in this case is the default index or your base table index, and not the global secondary index. To use the global secondary index, we'll have to pass the index name here, like this, and then use that index key. In this case it will be country to fetch our data from global secondary index, but right now we are using the base index, which is a default index, and we're using the base index primary key, table name here, and then also getting the return consumed capacity, how much RUs were consumed in running this query, and we want to do a consistent read. So if you remember, we can do two types of read on DynamoDB, eventually consistent and strongly consistent. By passing the value of consistent read as true, we are doing strongly consistent reads, which means that our read operation will wait for all the write operations to complete before it sends back the data. And if you remember, it consumes more RUs, but your read is consistent, strongly consistent. So we are always sure that we are reading the latest data updates. By default, this value is false, so you can set this value to true only in case we want to do strongly consistent reads. I'm going to export this method here and then import in my user.js file, and now I can call this method here. Get user, and of course we need to pass the email and the table name, which is users table, that we get from our environment variable that we set in serverless YAML file. Now I'm going to just copy the return. In fact, I'm just going to copy the whole try and catch block here. Need to add try block here. And that's it. We have our get user function ready. Let's go back to our console and run the deploy command. So our deployment is almost done. Okay, it's complete. Now let's go back to our Postman. I'm just going to create a duplicate of this request that I created earlier. Just name it get user. Our endpoint is same, but this time we have a get method, so we don't need anything inside the body. Let's save it and then run it. Oh wait, we need to also pass the email ID as path parameter. So here I will pass my email ID that we have here as well. Now let's send the request. Oh, so table name is missing. Looks like a spelling mistake. Right, this has to be capital. In fact, I don't need double quotes here. Right, I'll have to redeploy it. So our deployment is complete. We have our new endpoint here. Let's go back to our Postman and try the API endpoint once again. Again, as I was expecting, we got this error again. This means we need to authorize our new Lambda function as well to be able to access the DynamoDB table. That means we need to go back to serverless YAML file and add the role here for the new function. Right? And once again we'll have to redeploy. So our deployment is complete, but as our function or the number of functions we create grows, it will take even more time to deploy the whole project every time. So instead of deploying the whole project here, we can deploy a single function. So in this case, when we made change to get user function, to save time, we could have simply deployed our function, right? And not the whole project. To do that, we can simply modify our deploy command to deploy one function. So I'm going to write in function and then the function parameter, and then we need to pass the function name. And then of course we need to provide the profile, and I'm going to keep it in verbose mode. So this will just deploy the function that we want to update. And this will be a lot quicker, right? Now just because I'm redeploying it, I haven't made any changes. Here it's showing the code has not changed and deployment has skipped, but still you can see it was a lot quicker than deploying the whole project. Alright, let's go back to our Postman. So our function should have access to DynamoDB now, and we are able to fetch our item, right? Email and last name. And along with our item, we are also getting the consumed capacity because we kept the return consumed capacity parameter as total. So we know that for strongly consistent read, we use 1 RU for each read. And that's the value reflecting here under capacity units. Alright, so this way we are able to fetch our user by passing the partition key or the user ID. Well, that's all for this lecture, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.